There is nothing quite like a picturesque view of the British countryside, a sight quite unlike any other. Its patchwork of fields and villages that stretch out over the horizon leave an enduring picture in the mind, with images that can help calm the nerves and help us to forget our sometimes hectic and stressful lives. As we look out over this beautiful landscape, just think what it would be like without the trees and woods scattered far and wide, and you'll quickly realise just how much we actually need to appreciate British trees and woodlands. However, trees are rarely thought about, except perhaps by forestry experts and artists, yet they are much more than simply a wonderful sight to look at, because they are also a vital part of our planet's survival. Without trees, much of the land would be dry and barren. Many natural habitats for animals and birds would be gone, and probably most importantly of all, there would be no oxygen for anyone to breathe. Trees are very much the Earth's lungs because their leaves recycle the poisonous gases in the air and produce fresh oxygen. It's said that each person needs 2 trees to supply them with a year's supply of oxygen, which is more than most of us have in our back gardens. What exactly is a tree, though? How do we define what is and isn't a tree? Very simply, we could say that a tree consists of a wooden trunk with leaves. This most basic of descriptions does nevertheless highlight the main difference between a tree and other plants. A shrub, as we can see, has a large quantity of branches and stems with no real central trunk to support it. There's usually just a tangled mess of twigs and foliage, whereas a tree will always have its trunk that bears the weight of the plant. The tree trunk is of course wood, which man has valued highly since first emerging from his cave dwellings, with the inner layers or rings being dead but supportive material, while the outer layer, just below the bark, carries nutrients and water to the leaves. All living things must have a beginning, and a tree is certainly no exception to this rule. It's nevertheless astonishing to think that a tree of over 90 metres, or if you prefer, 300 feet in height, can grow from a seed smaller than a pea. The seed only has to find itself a patch of soil where it can germinate and then begin its growth process towards becoming a fully mature tree. It will have to outgrow other plants around it and fight for light if it's to survive, which is usually a slow process, with some trees living to be thousands of years old. But if a tree is successful in the early stages, it will thrive, as it can usually find more light as it grows taller than all the ground-based plants around it. And thankfully, trees can grow almost anywhere and adapt to suit just about any surroundings, from the harsh cold conditions of Greenland to the scorching heat of Africa. The British woodlands may not be so dramatic with our temperate climate, but it's still an integral part of the countryside and indeed the nation's proud history. Without Britain's trees and woodlands, much of the landscape would be unrecognisable, and the history of the United Kingdom and its people would be very different indeed. It's often said that every tree can tell an interesting story, with many of them standing where famous battles took place, while some will even have been involved in battles, having been cut down to make majestic ships. But before we go any further, here's how we can find out the age of a tree and what happened to it. Walking through woodland, a stump for most of us is nothing more than a sign of where a tree once stood, although on closer inspection it can tell us an awful lot. It is nature's own time machine, allowing us to see into the past, which can be achieved by looking at the rings that circle a stump. If we count the rings, it will give us an indication of how old the tree was when it was cut down or died. We are also able to see how many years of the tree's life enjoyed high rainfall by looking for the wide rings, and also any times of drought by searching for the narrow rings. It's also possible to tell if there has been an earthquake during the tree's life, or whether it suffered from the effects of pollution or disease. However, trees are much more than markers of the history of the land and an ecosystem, because they also had a vital part to play in the lives of the people of Great Britain as well, and are continuing to do so to this very day. Henry VIII, one of England's best-known kings, was legendary for chopping heads off in the Tower of London, and of his 6 wives, those that displeased him most suffered the same fate. And when it came to chopping, he was equally as good at directing his axemen to cut down trees as he was ordering executions. This was the age of the great naval battles, and Henry VIII has been celebrated for building a fleet of mighty warships to take on the world. But of course, to do this, he needed trees in abundance, and the woodlands of the nation were decimated. Henry's warmongering had a huge impact on tree numbers, the length and breadth of Great Britain, as he built ever more impressive battleships like the Mary Rose, which required in excess of 2,100-year-old English oak trees. King Henry VIII's impressive naval fleet won many battles, but this military prestige came at a high price as the forests were laid bare, and eventually an early conservation law was passed in 1544 to protect the English oaks from the ravages of a proud island nation. This great wooden warship, called the Victory, is of a much later date, as it was the flagship of Lord Nelson, who defeated Napoleon at the Battle of Trafalgar, although he lost his life aboard the Victory in doing so. Nevertheless, the ship has fared better than Nelson, and today you can really see how a wooden ship was constructed, and you quickly realise just how many trees would have needed to be cut down for such an enterprise. However, it was many years before Nelson and Henry VIII that a king of England actually had the foresight to plant the trees that made this possible, and he was a Frenchman. William the Conqueror and his Norman conquest may not have been popular when he beat the English and shot King Harold in the eye at the Battle of Hastings in 1066, but he set a system in place that would help to manage and protect the woodlands of his adopted nation. In fact, despite it being an incredibly old system, it's still in use to this day as a great foundation for 21st century conservation. There are few patches of British woodland that have remained untouched over the centuries, yet the New Forest in the south of England seems to have managed this beautifully. Despite the name, this forest is very old indeed, and it was William the Conqueror who actually bestowed its name upon it. As forestry progressed, the royal name started to be used, as you see here at the Royal Forest of Dean in Gloucestershire, which in 1938 was also named the first ever National Forest Park. If you visit the Royal Forest of Dean, one of the first things that you may notice is the large number of sheep that are roaming around the woods and roads. Don't worry, they haven't escaped from a nearby farm. The sheep are free roaming due to an ancient right that has allowed foresters to let their animals roam and graze for no charge. The title Forester and associated birthright is granted to people born in the 100 of St Breville's, which, although a charming village complete with an excellent pub, church and even a castle, is in fact a much larger area of the forest. The foresters, who are sheep keepers, or sheep badgers as they are known locally, are permitted to graze their sheep anywhere within the forest, and they are allowed to collect firewood from the forest floor as well as enjoying free mining rights. This privilege gives the foresters the right to mine wherever they choose, and although an option rarely taken up, over the centuries, many men have made their living in this way. Sadly, there are now only 2 working free mines within the forest today, although there is a wonderfully preserved mine at Clearwell, where visitors can experience what such a way of life would have been like. Now, when you think of forests, the New Forest and the Forest of Dean may well spring to mind, but chances are another candidate may be the most well-known choice. Sherwood Forest in Nottinghamshire is synonymous with Robin Hood, the legendary people's hero who robbed from the rich, most notably the Sheriff of Nottingham, to give to the poor. For this behaviour, Robin Hood and his band of merry men were decreed outlaws and lived in hiding amongst the trees of Sherwood Forest. This huge oak tree, known as the Major Oak, is probably one of the most famous trees in Great Britain, as it is where Robin Hood is alleged to have hidden on many occasions, and today thousands of visitors take a wonderful walk through the woods to find it. In reality, this mighty oak would have only been an acorn when Robin Hood was around in the early part of the 12th century. However, even the purists agree he would have hidden in a very similar specimen. But this tree is famous in its own right, as it's Britain's largest oak tree, weighing over 23 tons and having a girth of 33 feet. Or about 10 metres. This impressive tree may actually be a group of 3 trees that have fused together over time. And what's more, we can assure you that the inside was not cut out by Robin Hood's merry men. The perfect hiding place was actually caused by a type of fungi. The fungi would have got inside the tree and literally eaten away at the wood within. And as we have already seen, the inside of a tree is nothing more than supporting wood, so the oak has been able to carry on growing. Nevertheless, a few man-made supports have helped it to stay standing, which is very good news for all those on the Robin Hood trail. Now, when it comes to writing about forests and woodlands, there is none better than the great dramatist William Shakespeare. The Bard of Avon, as he was sometimes known, actually came from Stratford-upon-Avon, a beautiful town that still has more than its fair share of black and white timber buildings that date back to his day. A short distance from Stratford lies the magnificent Forest of Arden, where young William would have whiled away many hours of his childhood. This beautiful forest certainly influenced a number of Shakespeare's plays, and you only have to delve into the magic of A Midsummer Night's Dream and As You Like It to understand just what a special place this haven of great British woodland really is. Well, that's quite enough history and literature to be going on with. It's time to get on those walking boots and get out into the countryside in search of some trees. Just like people, trees live and thrive in different environments according to which conditions suit them best. Some trees enjoy wet, marshy valleys like the Scots pine and alder, while others, like the ash and beech, prefer dry limestone valleys. Not that trees have much to say in the matter these days, because with constant development all over Great Britain, woods have to be continually maintained and controlled. There are 2 major types of woodland in Britain: natural woodland and man-made. Although the natural wood sounds far more pleasant, both varieties play a significant role in the country's woodland system. As trees have become an important element of British life and economy, man-made woods have by necessity developed as an essential part of the British woodland system over the years. Trees are planted to replace the ones that have been cut down for the timber industry. Also, where a natural habitat has been destroyed, woodland can be introduced to make it productive again. Equally, man-made woods can be planted to protect vulnerable land against erosion. And of course, at Christmas time, where would any of us be without Christmas tree farms to provide us with the most seasonal of ecologically friendly products? Natural woodlands occur all over the British Isles, although few today are left to their own devices. Trees that grow in this way have always covered our island, and these woodlands were around long before the humans arrived on the scene. As you can see for yourself, natural woodland with little human intervention looks very different to the neat rows of a man-made wood. The waste of the forest is allowed to decompose in a natural wood, whereas in a man-made forest, debris and dead matter is usually cleared away. There are also a larger variety of trees in a natural wood, as there is no one planting the seeds, allowing trees to grow wherever they are able, whereas a man-made wood will typically consist of a small number of tree species, planted for the landowner's requirements. There are over 80,000 species of tree throughout the world, with different types being frequently discovered, while sadly other varieties have become extinct. Incredibly, 10% of the world's tree species are on the endangered list, which is very worrying indeed. Generally speaking, trees are split into two categories: evergreens and deciduous. The trees that stay green all year round, like the pine, cedar and spruce, are naturally the evergreens, whereas the trees that lose their leaves in the autumn, like oaks, maples and beeches, are deciduous. Now, if you'd like to take a closer look at trees, arboretums are the perfect choice, and here is a selection of trees that you might be lucky enough to find in just such a place near you. There are many types of pine, and these trees are probably best known for the wood that they produce, light-coloured and soft, that's used in the mass production of furniture. We can identify a pine tree by looking at its leaves and seeds. The seeds are produced in pine cones that litter the floor of a pine wood. The cones come in all manner of shapes and sizes, and one of the most common is this example, which comes from the Scots pine, the only native pine in the British Isles. The leaves are very distinct, being long and thin and better known as needles. When they fall from the trees, they produce a thick layer across the ground that other plants find very hard to penetrate. The cedar is also an evergreen variety and is very similar in shape and appearance to the pine tree. It is in fact part of the same family, and sometimes the difference between a given pine and a cedar can be very slight, with the cedar generally a little bushier than the pine. The cedar has needles like the pine, and the seeds can also be found in cones. The wood from the cedar tree is extremely aromatic, and if a wardrobe is made of cedar, it will keep the clothes smelling beautiful and keep away the moths and bugs. In North America, the Cherokee Indians carry pieces of cedar because the smell helps them to remember their ancestors, as they believe the spirits of their dead live on within the trees. The wood is also said to have powerful protective properties, and this tradition has been passed down through the generations, and you'll find many protective charms made of cedar wood. The monkey puzzle tree, despite its interesting name, is a pine and is actually known as the Chilean pine in its native country. These trees are very often grown in ornamental gardens for their unusual shape and characteristics. One of the most distinctive traits of this tree will always be its branches, as they are made up of swirls of very stiff pointed leaves that are surprisingly sharp if you touch them. The monkey puzzle tree is considered to be one of the most primitive plants around, and when you gaze at its extraordinary shape and bizarre branches, you can certainly see why. The common name monkey puzzle has many different stories linked to it, without any one particular anecdote claiming to be the true source of its title. The tale that is most widely used is the fact that the trees are very hard to climb due to being covered in spikes. During a tree planting ceremony in Chile, a dignitary is noted to have once said, "It would puzzle a monkey to climb that tree." Moving on, our next tree will be instantly recognisable because it's the species that most of us bring indoors at Christmas time. The spruce is, as you might guess from looking at it, a member of the pine family with its conical shape. The bark is a reddish colour and slightly cracked all over. The needles of this pine are singular and are attached in a spiral formation around the twigs and branches. Like other pine trees, the spruce produces cones which contain the seeds, measuring up to 18 centimetres in length. The exact origin of where the tradition of decorating spruce trees at Christmas time comes from has been forgotten over time, but most people believe that it developed initially from ancient pagan rituals rather than Christian ones. When trees like the oak lost their leaves, the people believed it was because the tree spirits had run away. To try and persuade them to come back, they tied brightly coloured material to the branches, and of course, when the spring came, they believed they'd been successful. Eventually, the Christians introduced the three-pointed pine tree to represent the Father, Son and Holy Ghost, so linking this tradition with the birth of Christ. This ritual tree dressing didn't come to Britain until Queen Victoria's day, when Prince Albert, her German husband, brought a tree from his native Germany, where they had been dressing Christmas trees for many years, and gave it to his wife as a surprise, all decorated with candles. And naturally, where the royal family led, the great British public followed, and Christmas trees have been popular ever since. Another tree linked with Christmas celebrations is the holly. Often seen as a bush, if given the chance, holly will mature into a small tree. The bark of the holly is smooth and grey, with most of the trunk hidden by foliage, protecting it down to ground level, where grazing animals will avoid its sharp leaves. The leaves are a glossy dark green with large serrations all around that end in stiff pointed tips. Throughout winter, much to the joy of many birds, the tree will bear an abundance of red berries. The brightness of the foliage and the berries help to cheer up a forest, which for the most part is dark and dormant during the cold months. The holly has long been a symbol of goodwill and peace, and this is why so many of us hang up the leaves and berries in our homes, a tradition which still continues to this day. Now, our next species, the redwood, is the Earth's largest living tree and looks exactly the same now as they did when the dinosaurs dominated the landscape. The redwoods then covered much of the northern hemisphere, and if you want to see huge examples of these trees, then you need to head for North America. Sadly, there are no redwoods in Britain that are anywhere near as impressive as their American cousins. Nonetheless, when you find them at arboretums, they are wonderful to look at. As the tree's name would suggest, the bark is a rich red-brown colour and is spongy to the touch with a flaky appearance. If you catch the sun shining on the bark of a redwood, it reflects the light and casts a red glow over the forest floor. The redwood produces seed cones that resemble the inside of a walnut, with leaves that are long, pointed and only slightly wider than that of the pine needle. Redwoods thrive best in misty conditions, as the leaves are able to draw in moisture from the air, which at great heights is far quicker than relying on getting water from the ground. The fir is another impressive evergreen, and although not native to Britain, it was introduced so long ago it's now extremely common, because it can withstand many conditions and soil types. Fir trees can grow to great heights and still retain the conical shape, but they're much more untidy looking than the neater spruce. This species produces very compact cones that grow upright and are found towards the top of the tree before opening up in the autumn to release the seeds. The needles are flatter than that of the pine, ending in a rounded tip with a rich green colour. Scotch firs are extremely important as they provide many products including tar, pitch, turpentine and resin. The timber of the Scotch fir is also very useful in furniture production. However, there are many superstitions linked with the fir tree, which suggests that if it is ever struck by lightning or begins to die, then death is imminent for its owner. So be prepared if you decide to plant one of these trees in your garden. The larch is also a member of the pine family, although it looks quite different to other evergreens. However, the larch is still one of the few conifers that are bare in the winter months. It will lose its leaves during the winter and regrow them in spring, just like deciduous trees. The larch, if given the space, is a neat tapering tree that can grow surprisingly tall. Habitually found growing on mountains, the larch thrives in well-drained soil. The soft needles grow in circular tufts that resemble thousands of miniature fireworks growing out of the tree's branches. The cones are fairly small and more floral in shape than many of its cousins, with cones often remaining on the tree for many years. The larch has very useful antibacterial properties towards its roots, which can be utilised to make a natural disinfectant. The yew is a rather diminutive tree in height, but makes up for it in width. Yews live for a very long time, quite commonly up to 2,000 years, and the oldest yew in Britain is thought to possibly be 9,000 years of age. A yew is still an evergreen with needles very much like the spruce, however, it doesn't produce cones. Instead, at the tips of its branches, red berry-shaped fruits appear, which would taste sweet to eat. However, these seeds, and indeed every other part of the plant, are highly poisonous. Your best chance of seeing yew trees will be in churchyards, as they have always been linked with life and death. The tree can bring death if it's eaten, but can live seemingly forever. Nennius, a 9th century historian, had this to say on the subject of the yew tree, and it would appear he got it right. The lives of 3 wattles, the lives of a hound, the lives of 3 hounds, the life of a steed, the lives of 3 steeds, the life of a man, the lives of 3 eagles, the life of a yew, the life of a yew, the length of an age. And so we come to our deciduous varieties, with leaves that are all kinds of different colours, sizes and shapes. The birch is a fast-growing tree that typically lives for no more than 100 years. We can distinguish this tree by its white, almost silver bark and the dipping twigs that hang down. With leaves that are almost diamond in shape with little teeth all the way around, identification is fairly straightforward. Birch trees have always been viewed as one of Europe's most beautiful species for many very good reasons. The leaves are not at all dense, so taking a wander through a birch wood is an absolute delight, as the pale green coloured foliage allows plenty of sunshine through to the woodland floor, while the leaves sway and rustle in even the slightest breeze. These trees can even look majestic at night, as the silver on the bark is able to reflect the moonlight. So a birch really stands out from the rest of the forest. Many years ago, the people of the Northern Hemisphere, who had to endure long winters, would call the tree the Shining One, for obvious reasons. The alder tree is most commonly found near water, as they thrive in damp conditions. And if you're walking along a river or by a lake anywhere in Britain, chances are that you will see one of these lovely trees. The shape of the alder does vary though, with single specimens found near water having a rather open and tidy crown. Alder seeds are formed in catkins, but the female catkins remain on the tree long after the seeds are gone, appearing like small cones. The bark of the tree is a deep, rich reddish-brown colour and can be identified by the large network of small interweaving channels. Alder leaves are fairly rounded with slight serrated edges that resemble the birch tree's leaves. The foliage is quite sticky to the touch, and the famous herbalist Nicholas Culpeper had this to say about the alder. The said leaves gathered while the morning dew is on them and brought into a chamber troubled with fleas will gather them thereunto, which being suddenly cast out will rid the chamber of these troublesome bedfellows. A tree with a similar name is the elder, yet it is a very different tree to the alder. Where the alder will reach heights of up to 131 feet, about 40 metres, while the elder will be lucky if it reaches a quarter of that height, growing to a maximum of about 31 feet, or 9 metres. The elder tree will grow almost anywhere, and very much like a weed will spring up in unused soil, cracks in pavements, and indeed wherever its seeds can get a foothold. The leaves formed in opposites along the stem are oval in shape and have a pointed tip. The tree will be most recognisable in June when it produces clusters of white flowers which develop in autumn to form large bunches of black-coloured berries. The fragrant elder flowers are often used to make wine and cordial, as are the elderberries later in the year. The elder has long been believed to have magical properties, and in ancient times parts of the tree were used in ritual exorcisms. The tree was also thought to have power over evil spirits in the home, so people would hang up the berries and even the branches to stop the evil spirits getting to them in the first place. Elder is also reported to be one of the best woods for wizards and witches to make their magic wands out of, but that's another story altogether. Since 1965, the maple leaf has been at the centre of the Canadian flag, making the foliage of this tree instantly recognisable. The leaves have 5 pointed lobes that are toothed around the edge. They are usually a good size and make a wonderful show, covering the tree in the height of summer, and consequently the maple has long been used in parks for the shade it provides. Another recognisable feature of the maple tree is the seeds, which are commonly known as helicopters, due to the wings that spin as they fall to the forest floor, park or garden. The bark of the maple is a grey-brown colour and has a network of small grooves. The very high-quality hardwood this tree provides is used to make exceptionally sturdy and expensive furniture. Equally, the maple tree is also extremely famous for the syrup that's produced from its sap, and this is pretty high quality and expensive too, but a wonderful sweet sticky treat nevertheless. Next we have the sycamore, a tree that is part of the maple family, being Europe's largest native maple, growing anywhere up to 115 feet, which is about 35 metres in height. In autumn, the leaves of most deciduous trees turn wondrous colours of rust and gold, but the sycamore works in reverse. The new growth in spring produces leaves of a rich orange and red that green up throughout the season, and when autumn comes, the leaves don't really change colour a great deal before dying. The leaves are similar in shape to the maple, with 5-toothed pointed lobes, and the seeds are also winged, but do just point down a little more than those of the maple. The sycamore germinates quickly, with the new shoots being a familiar sight in gardens and parks throughout Britain in spring and summer. The bark around the base of the tree is smooth and grey, while working up the trunk it becomes much more flaked and cracked. Sycamores have long been linked with arrangements and meetings. Even to this day, Egyptian women who are experiencing marital problems will sit under the shade of a sycamore tree to think and contemplate their difficulties. This lovely horse chestnut tree is a very familiar sight throughout Britain, and although not native, has thrived here due to the temperate weather conditions. The trees grow tall and wide, with well-established horse chestnuts resembling a rounded rectangle. In early spring, the trees produce a vast array of white flowers. There are huge clusters on each stalk, and all of them point straight up towards the sun. As each stalk of flowers die back, 1 or 2 spiky seed cases grow in their place, and these contain between 1 and 3 hard nuts that are commonly known as conkers. The horse chestnut, although inedible to humans, is fine for cattle, deer and horses, and the nut is reported to be a cure for wind in horses. Conkers have proved popular with generations of children. During the autumn, playgrounds up and down the country are filled with conkers on strings as classmates battle it out, taking it in turns to hit their conkers against each other's to see who has the toughest conker of them all. This game is not just limited to children though. Every year in the Northamptonshire village of Ashton, the World Conker Championship is held, with the winner claiming their place on the conker throne. Like many fruit trees, the pear is a rather short specimen, usually growing less than 32 feet or 10 metres in height. Its appearance is somewhat scraggy, with brown scaly bark, and the twigs are yellow towards the end. The leaves of the pear are oval in shape and have a green shine to them. In spring, throughout late March and early April, the tree is covered in white blossom that will mature into the pear fruit. The pear is a bell-bottom fruit with a dry yet sweet flavour and has been a favourite British summertime fruit for centuries, either enjoyed just as it is or in cooking and desserts. The weeping willow is a calming, drooping tree that is often found leaning gracefully over rivers and lakes. The willow thrives in wetlands due to its quick growth and large roots. The bark of the tree is light brown, with upright ruts all over the trunk. Willow leaves are thin ovals with small serrations all the way around and are a silvery green colour that are easy to recognise due to the fact that when the wind blows through the tree, the shimmer of the colours give the impression of tiny ripples in water as the sun shines on it. This tree, like many others, is linked with fertility, and because of its thin, slender branches and leaves, it has also been associated with serpents. In ancient Greece, priests would place willow branches in the beds of infertile women in the hope that it would call on one of the serpent gods, who represent fertility, to bless them with a child. It's said that the gentle rustle of willow trees can also be a great source of inspiration, as artists, poets and writers over the years have alluded to the willow in just about every art form you can imagine. The beech is an impressive tree when fully mature and has a huge spreading crown that can reach up to about 131 feet or 40 metres in height. Its leaves are oval in shape with a slight sheen to them and very slender serrations. The seed pods, which appear in late summer, are covered in soft bristles, and they burst open when ripe to reveal 3 triangular-shaped nuts. The trunk of the beech tree is grey and smooth and has long been a favourite with lovers who carve their names on it, ever since Shakespeare wrote about it in As You Like It. Over time, however, as the lovers grow older, so too does the tree, and as each year passes, the tree grows thicker and it will eventually consume the engraving until all traces have disappeared. The beech, however, is best viewed in the autumn months, when its leaves turn a delightful variation of colours from rich red to golden ochre, and when the low sun hits the tree, its beauty is increased tenfold. The foliage remains on the tree for an incredibly long period of time, so it's possible to enjoy the colours for much of the season of mists and mellow fruitfulness. It seems fitting that as our exploration of trees and woodlands of Great Britain draws to a close, we turn to the mighty English oak, and they certainly don't grow much grander than this magnificent specimen tucked away in the Forest of Dean in Gloucestershire. It's been aptly named the Forest Giant and towers above the other trees around it, and really dominates the whole area. This oak is immediately recognisable, but on smaller trees the leaves, which are round in shape with a fine-toothed edge, will confirm identification. The seeds also prove positively that it's an oak in the form of acorns that appear at the end of the branches. Acorns are fairly heavy and can't carry any distance through the air, so they have to rely on animals and a little luck to carry them to an appropriate place where they can germinate safely. It was once thought that the oak was the first tree created by God, which would logically explain why they dominate the older forests. But this tree is basically a natural survivor, and the British have certainly taken the oak to their hearts as a national symbol. Despite the oak being so dominant, trees of all species are generically viewed as a very important part of the United Kingdom's green and pleasant lands. Artists have for centuries painted them, written about them, and even carved them, while the less talented amongst us have sat under their welcome shade, hoping for inspiration, or at the very least a little pleasant relaxation. The function and purpose of trees and woodlands are many. They can be enjoyed throughout the entire year, and individual specimens can delight us with a different attribute each and every month. Trees continually play a vital part in our survival, yet also fill our hearts with joy as their beauty lights up even the darkest corner of the land. Forests and woodlands truly are magical places for visitors of every age, and the younger we introduce our children to the enjoyment of trees, the safer the future of the environment will be. Trees are a wonderful resource that quite literally gives a breath of fresh air to a world in danger of suffocating. So next time you're out and about in the countryside, make sure you take the time to truly appreciate the beauty of Britain's magnificent trees and woodlands. And who knows, the world may even seem a much nicer place.